The problem that I've always had when people would look at a training program to try to determine, is this a balanced program? Because the first flaw that I kind of see with that is most sports inherently have their own.
Get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up. Throw your hands in the sky.
The question is should your pulling volume be twice as much as your pressing volume? You're starting to deal with muscle balance issues in regards to different planes. And you know, we can go to this and say, you know, should your horizontal pulls balance your horizontal presses? Should your arching balance be balanced with your rounding for your back? Should your knee extensions be balanced with your knee flexions? And I mean, we can kind of beat this to death. And when you're talking volume, you're not mentioning anything about intensity. And that's kind of the problem that I've always had when people would look at a training program to try to determine, is this a balanced program? Because the first flaw that I kind of see with that is most sports inherently have their own imbalance to begin with. So if the sport already has its imbalance to be exceptional at that sport, and then you're going to try to balance what's supposed to be imbalanced, you can potentially make a great athlete suck. So that's one aspect that becomes flawed. The second aspect that kind of becomes flawed with that is, you know, when you're pressing, you're still stabilizing with your lats. You know, when you're doing your lats, you're still stabilizing with, you know, your shoulders and everything else. So if you're going to be body part training or even training on different movement patterns, you're still incorporating, you know, more movements than just the movement, the primary movement that you think that's actually there. So the third point is when you remove the intensity, you know, is, in other words, you can do a super heavy, maximal, balls out set of 20 reps on the deadlift until, I mean, it takes everything you have to pull the last rep. So you basically got, you know, 20 pulls, and then you need to balance that. If you're doing, you know, a balls out heavy set of bench presses, and you do a maximal set of 20 reps, and it takes everything you have, and you're killing yourself to be able to do the bench presses, and you know, you barely make the last 2 reps, and it's only 20 reps, but that's 20 reps at a very, very high intensity using loose form, which actually brings the intensity factor up a little bit higher, and the effort's through the roof. Do you balance that by just doing 2 sets of 10 with 16-pound kettlebell rows? You know, that's balancing the volume, but it's not balancing the intensity. So don't worry so much about balancing the volume. You know, work on balancing the intensity, and actually spend more time working on, you know, what is the primary objective of the reason why you're training. Let's focus on that first. You know, is it powerlifting to build the squat, bench, and deadlift? You know, and then build the program around what needs to take place for that to happen. Because inherently, training for that will create certain imbalances which can be addressed, you know, in the end of the training session, as far as what I would call prehab, rehab, or it can be addressed, you know, after the meet or in the off season or GPP or whatnot. Or if it's bodybuilding, you know, you may not necessarily want to balance every movement pattern because you may have a muscle group that's so much stronger than everything else that you actually need to back off of that to try to bring one up to match from that standpoint. So let's refocus, you know, and reframe the way that you're looking at it to what is the overall objective of what your training is, and then build it out from there. And then from there, if you look at the program that you have built out and you see something that really stands out, like, holy shit, this is all pressing. Well, yeah, you need to put in some type of pulling type stuff, but I'm not a firm believer that it has to be a 1-to-1 balance or a 2-to-1 balance or anything like that. I think that's just a bunch of, bullshit people make up to throw things out to make them sound smarter than they really are. You do need to, be conditioned enough to reach the objectives that you're trying to reach. As long as those objectives are good, solid objectives, the balance kind of builds its way into the program. The best specific thing for a beginner or a novice to do is just something like, Dave, you got like 6 weeks of glycogen in your system right now. So I kind of knew it was going to be a long